All right, hey guys, we're gonna start the next chapter, which really starts kind of a new segue for us in the class, because now we're gonna start talking about everything that has a backbone. So the video you guys just spent the last couple of days watching, I hope you somewhat enjoyed, just kind of learning about the evolution of the vertebrate and kind of what scientists believe and see and how we got here. So hopefully by the end of this section, you're able to identify the key characteristics of vertebrates. We're going to start out talking about the fish. So hopefully you can talk about two adaptations found in early fishes. Again, this is all going to kind of reinforce what the video is talking about. Identify the relationship between fishes and amphibians, and then summarize key adaptations that the amphibians had to have to live on land. So let's just talk about, if you go to the zoo, many of the animals we see there are vertebrates. They are chordates with a backbone. So not the invertebrate chordates, but chordates with a backbone. And most appear different on the outside, but we're all pretty similar on the inside, and this indicates that we all share some sort of a common ancestor. The vertebrates take their name from the individual backbone segments called vertebrae or backbones, and we're going to have like these typical repeating segments over and over and over. The backbone completely replaces the notochord that was found in the invertebrate chordates. It's going to completely replace that. The backbone is going to provide support and protect the dorsal nerve cord or the spinal cord, and the backbone is going to provide muscle attachment. This is what allowed for the internal skeleton to become strong, allowing us to grow much larger. In addition to the backbone, vertebrates have a skull that is going to protect the brain. And we all share 7 characteristics: segmentation, bilateral symmetry, 2 pairs of jointed appendages, cephalization, complex organ systems and brains, a true coelom, and a closed circulatory system. So our nervous system is going to be able to monitor the environment. Our circulatory system is going to carry blood. Our digestive system is going to use and break down food. Our respiratory system is going to exchange gas in the air. Our reproductive systems are going to be able to produce and carry sperm or egg. And then the excretory system is going to remove all of the waste that our body can produce. The first chordates evolved about 550 million years ago. Many different groups of these organisms appeared in the shallow seas that covered most of Earth at the time. According to the fossil record, the first vertebrates evolved about 50 million years later, so that's 500 million years ago. The first fishes, called agnathans, had no jaws and no paired fins. You're going to want to star that. The agnathans had neither jaws nor paired fins. But they did have a backbone, which provided a central axis for muscle attachment. And as their muscles pulled on their backbone, they pulled themselves along the ocean floor. So we're actually looking at this guy. This would be like his nose, and he would push himself, say, in this direction forward, laying flat on the surface. Not swimming like we think of a fish, but more like crawling on his belly. Within another 50 million years ago, so if you're keeping track, that's 450 million years ago, the jawless fishes had diversified into a great variety of species. The major groups, the major group was the ostracoderms, which was a primitive, or had a primitive fin and these massive plates of body tissue on their bodies. The jawless fishes were able to dominate the oceans for about 100 million years until they were replaced by new kinds of fishes that were active hunters. So to survive the predators in the ocean, the fish had to meet 2 new challenges. The first was to pursue prey through the water. They had to be fast, agile swimmers, and their bodies had to be streamlined, and many of them flattened sideways, which was different than the agnathan, which kind of crawled on his belly. They're going to be flattened sideways, which makes it easier for them to move and take hard turns in the water. They also had to have paired fins that were supported by spines, which provided the fine control of their movement. The second challenge was actually getting a hold of the prey once they actually were able to swim close enough to it. So about 430 million years ago, the acanthidodians, or the spiny fishes, had appeared. They had strong jaws with jagged or bony edges that served as teeth. So no actual teeth. It would just be like a jagged, like a dull knife. No actual blade, just some protruding objects in their mouth that would enable them to hold on to that prey. The development of the jaw in the fish was a key evolutionary innovation, though, because the jaws are thought to have come from the gill arch supports, which were made of cartilage. We know that cartilage is a lightweight, strong, flexible tissue. So we believe if we started here, these are their gill arches, the white and transitioning into the yellow there, where there's clearly no jaw, and that eventually we were able to split those gill arches and make a mouth. The spiny fishes had internal skeletons of cartilage, although some of the fossils we're finding now indicate that their skeletons also had some bone. Their scales were small plates of bone, and this presence of bone would play a much larger role in their descendants later. So then about 20 million years after the acanthidodians appeared, the placoderms evolved. The placoderms were jawless fish with massive heads and armored bony plates. By the end of the Devonian period, almost all of the early fishes, including the placoderms, had disappeared. And after dominating the seas for almost 50 million years, they were replaced by much swifter swimmers, which we call the sharks and the bony fishes, things that we're more familiar with now. About 400 million years ago, the sharks and the bony fishes were the first to appear. They were the superior swimmers who thrived in the oceans of the Devonian period. They had streamlined bodies that were well adapted for rapid, fast movement through the water, and they also had movable fins that aided in swimming. The sharks and the bony fishes have evolved completely different, though. So they evolved together at first and then took two hard lefts and a right. The sharks have a skeleton that is still composed of some cartilage, but it has calcium carbonate layered on top. So it's very tough, but light. Then the bony fishes, on the other hand, is completely made of bone, which is heavier and not as flexible. But they do have a swim bladder, which compensates for that heavy skeleton. And so the swim bladder is just a gas-filled sac that buoys them in the water, and they're able to control their movement up and down. Today, there are more fish than any other group of vertebrates, both in terms of species and number of organisms. They are considering water covers 3/4 of the Earth's surface, and that fish live in virtually every aquatic habitat. That makes sense. But we have them in three major groups: the agnathans, the cartilaginous fishes, and the bony fishes. The first cartilaginous fishes, aka the sharks, and the bony fishes evolved about the same time. These two groups were likely evolved from some early jawless fish that gave rise to the acanthidodians and the placoderms. The shark kept evolving into skates and rays, again, kind of way on the other side compared to the bony fish. The bony fish are the most familiar to us. They make up about 95% of the modern fish species. They evolved to adapt many different environments. They vary in shape, color, size, jaw size. I mean, we just look at the sturgeon clear down to the eel and how different yet similar they all are. And so then we transition into the amphibians. So the first group of vertebrates to live on land appeared about 370 million years ago, and they probably evolved from a group of bony fish called lobe-finned fish. The pattern of bone structure is very similar in amphibians and lobe-finned fishes. That's why we're able to say that they probably evolved from one another. There are several species of lobe-finned fishes alive today. However, the species that gave rise to the amphibians are completely extinct. We're not going to be able to find them anywhere. Although some of the amphibians appeared during the Devonian period, they increased greatly during the Carboniferous period. Biologists actually call this period the age of the amphibians because the number of amphibian families increased from 14 to 34. So we're basically evolving 20 new species of amphibians. So by the late Carboniferous period, much of what was to become North America was completely covered in low-lying tropical swamplands where the amphibians were able to thrive because of that moist environment, and they also would start sharing it with early reptiles. In the Permian period that followed, the amphibians reached their greatest diversity, up to 40 families. In the early Permian period, many of the amphibians began moving from marshes to dry land. So they went from that swampy area to more like grass and things like that. And by the middle of the Permian period, 60% of the amphibian species were living on dry land. The Ariops was one of the first to move completely on land, so it looks squatty, kind of like a frog here in the middle. We've got a tail similar to like an alligator, and then that head, it looks very alligator or reptile-like. So life on land was quite different than in the water, and so there had to be 3 major adaptations to be successful. The first one was legs that were able to support the body's weight as well as allow for movement from place to place. Because we were coming out of the water where we could pretty much float and swim wherever we needed to. And so we had to develop not only legs, but legs that were strong enough to support us and move us. And then we had to develop lungs because the structure of the fish gill depends on water, and on land we're obviously not able to do that. And so lungs had to come up with a way to basically carry out that gas exchange so we could breathe. And kind of hand in hand with that, we had to develop the heart. Because walking on land requires a great deal of energy compared to swimming. And so the land animals had to develop something that would help them be more successful when they moved. The land animals actually still tend to have a higher metabolic rate than aquatic animals because they do so much extra work walking compared to swimming, and therefore require more oxygen. So this makes sense that the heart and lungs had to take on some great developmental strides. The modern amphibians have all these adaptations, but did not fully adjust to life on land. The amphibian eggs are not watertight, and therefore they must be laid in water to keep them moist. So amphibians, even today, still rely on water. We are not completely terrestrial. But as the middle Permian period marked the peak of the amphibian success. By the end of the period, a new vertebrate had evolved. A reptile called the therapsid began replacing amphibians on land. By the end of the Triassic period, which was before the Jurassic, there were only 15 families of amphibians. And then by the Jurassic period, only 3 groups remained: the frogs, the salamanders, and the caecilians. This word is going to keep coming up. It is not caecilians. I've heard a lot of different pronunciations, but it is C, that AE makes just an E sound, caecilians. All of today's amphibians are descendants of the amphibians that survived into that Jurassic period. They are found in aquatic and moist habitats throughout temperate and tropical regions of the world, but never forget that we cannot completely get rid of water. We are still dependent on water. The frogs and the toads make up the largest and most familiar group. Then we have the salamanders and the newts, and then the caecilians account for less than 1% of today's amphibians. So, we're going to start transitioning into more land animals. I hope you guys are having a great week. And if you have any questions, make sure you ask. See ya.